The poor schoolteacher had $3, one suitcase, and nowhere to sleep when the richest cowboy in the county stopped his horse in front of her. She expected him to offer money. Instead, he looked at her with a seriousness that made her heart stop and said, "I need a mother for my sons. And you need shelter." But there was something he did not tell her. He had not chosen her because she was poor, and he had not chosen her because she was kind to his children. Years before she ever came to Willow Creek, his dying wife had written one final letter, and inside that letter was Clara Bennett's name. Before this story ends, the hidden connection will change everything you thought you knew about the cowboy, the teacher, and the two lonely boys. If you love emotional frontier stories filled with secrets, sacrifice, family, and second chances, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Meaningful Impact 2.1, because this story is only beginning. In the autumn of 1884, the town of Willow Creek sat beneath a gray sky surrounded by endless fields, rocky hills, and distant mountains. It was the kind of frontier town where everyone knew everyone's business, and a person could lose their reputation faster than they could earn a dollar. Clara Bennett had learned that lesson the hard way. At 28 years old, she had spent the last 2 years teaching children in a small one-room schoolhouse at the edge of town. She had no husband, no parents, and no wealthy relatives waiting to rescue her. All she had was her education, her determination, and a belief that every child deserved someone who believed in them. But that belief did not pay her rent. On a cold Thursday afternoon, Clara stood before the town school board, and listened as 3 men told her the school would close. There was not enough money to keep paying her. She begged them to reconsider, reminding them that 23 children depended on the school. The chairman simply lowered his eyes and said, "Miss Bennett, times are hard." Clara walked out carrying a wooden box filled with books and papers. When she returned to the boarding house, another disappointment waited. The owner placed her suitcase outside, and told her she had until sunset to leave. Clara stood beneath the porch roof, staring at the suitcase as rain began falling around her. She counted the money in her pocket, $3.17. It was everything she had. Across town, Nathaniel Reed watched the rain from the balcony of his enormous ranch house. At 38, Nathaniel was the wealthiest cattleman within 100 miles. Silver Creek Ranch covered thousands of acres and employed dozens of men. Yet inside that beautiful home, there was a silence money could not cure. Nathaniel had 2 sons, Samuel and Eli, ages 8 and 6. Their mother, Eleanor, had died 2 years earlier. Since then, Samuel had become quiet and serious, whilst Eli suffered terrible nightmares. Nathaniel had hired governesses, but everyone eventually left. Some wanted money, others wanted influence. None understood what the boys needed. Nathaniel had stopped searching for someone to fill the empty place in his home. He believed no one could replace Eleanor. Then, one afternoon, Samuel came home from the town schoolhouse holding a book. Nathaniel asked where he had found it. Samuel answered, "Miss Bennett gave it to me." He then said something that caught his father completely off guard. "She says Mama would want us to keep learning." Nathaniel froze. He had never told Clara anything about Eleanor's wishes. That night, he opened the old wooden chest containing his late wife's belongings. He had avoided it for 2 years. Beneath a folded shawl was Eleanor's final letter. Nathaniel read it again for the first time in months. Most of the letter was about the boys, but one paragraph made his hands tremble. Eleanor had written about a young teacher she had met years earlier in another town. Her name was Clara Bennett. Eleanor described her as the woman with the kindest heart I have ever seen. She had asked Nathaniel that if anything happened to her, he should someday find Clara. Not as a replacement wife, but as someone who could teach their children that life could still be good after loss. Nathaniel had never known where Clara was, until now. That evening, Nathaniel rode into Willow Creek looking for her. He found Clara standing alone beneath the boarding house porch, her suitcase beside her. She was soaked from the rain, but she refused to cry. Nathaniel dismounted and approached her. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I believe you taught my son Samuel." Clara recognized him immediately. She had seen Nathaniel several times but had never spoken to him directly. She nodded. Nathaniel looked at her suitcase. "Where are you going?" Clara gave a faint smile. "I don't know yet." Nathaniel looked toward the darkening street. "Then come to Silver Creek." Clara immediately shook her head. "I don't need charity." Nathaniel respected the answer. "I didn't offer charity, I offered employment." He explained that his sons needed a private teacher and that he would pay her fairly. Clara hesitated before accepting. The next morning, she arrived at Silver Creek Ranch. Samuel watched her from the staircase with suspicion. Eli hid behind a chair. Clara did not chase them or demand their attention. She simply placed her books on the table and began preparing lessons. For the first few days, the boys barely spoke. Then one afternoon, Eli noticed Clara struggling to light the fireplace. Without saying a word, he brought her a small wooden stool. Clara smiled and thanked him. The following morning he sat beside her during reading lessons. Samuel took longer. He wanted to know why she had come. Clara told him the truth. Because your father offered me a job. Samuel frowned. Not because you feel sorry for us? Clara shook her head. No, I don't feel sorry for you. I think you are both stronger than you realize. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his book. Weeks passed, and something extraordinary happened. The boys began laughing again. Eli stopped hiding whenever strangers entered the room. Samuel started writing stories. Nathaniel watched the transformation from a distance, afraid to interfere. One evening, he found Clara teaching the boys beneath the lantern light. She noticed him and said, "Your sons don't need someone to replace their mother." Nathaniel's expression changed. "Then what do they need?" Clara answered, "Someone who will stay." Those words stayed with him all night. The next morning, Nathaniel made a decision that frightened even him. He found Clara standing beside the corral and said, "I want to make you an offer." Clara looked confused. Nathaniel continued, "You need a mother for my sons, you need a home, I believe we could help each other." Clara stared at him, stunned. "You are asking me to marry you?" Nathaniel nodded. "Yes, but not because you're poor, and not because I own this ranch. If you refuse, you will still have a job here, and I will make sure you have somewhere safe to live." Clara looked toward the ranch house, where Samuel and Eli were watching through the window. Her heart softened, but before she could answer, a rider came racing through the ranch gates. He jumped from his horse, breathless, holding a sealed envelope. "Mr. Reed," the man said, "this came from the county courthouse." Nathaniel opened it. His face went pale. The letter claimed that Eleanor Reed's death had not been accidental. And someone was preparing to prove that Nathaniel himself had been responsible, and at the bottom of the document was a name Clara recognized. Her own father's name. For several seconds, nobody moved. Clara stared at the document in Nathaniel's hand, unable to understand what she was seeing. Her father, Thomas Bennett, had died 6 years earlier. Nathaniel looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Not anger, but shock. The letter claimed that Thomas Bennett had witnessed something connected to Eleanor Reed's death, and had left evidence behind before his own death. Someone was now threatening to expose that evidence, and use it against Nathaniel. Clara's first thought was that the marriage proposal had been a trap. "You knew my father?" she asked. Nathaniel slowly shook his head. "Not personally. But Eleanor did." Clara stepped back. Suddenly, the strange connection between her and Eleanor no longer felt like coincidence. Before she could ask another question, a gunshot cracked somewhere beyond the ranch. Samuel and Eli screamed from inside the house. Nathaniel immediately ordered everyone away from the windows and ran toward the sound. The shooter had already disappeared into the trees, leaving behind only a torn piece of black cloth caught on a fence post. Nathaniel examined it carefully. He recognized the material. Henry Reed, his own brother, had worn a black coat when he arrived at the ranch weeks earlier. Nathaniel refused to accuse him without proof, but the discovery made one thing clear. Someone wanted the truth buried. Clara spent that night awake, thinking about her father. Thomas Bennett had always been a quiet man. Before his death, he had warned Clara never to trust anyone who asked too many questions about the Reed family. She had assumed he was speaking about ordinary frontier gossip. Now she wondered whether he had known something dangerous. Near midnight, Clara remembered an old wooden box her father had given her when she was 17. She had carried it from house to house without ever opening the hidden compartment beneath its bottom panel. The next morning, Clara found the box in her suitcase. Beneath the false wooden panel was a folded piece of paper and a small brass key. The paper contained only 6 words. Eleanor knew who betrayed her. Clara showed Nathaniel. His face became pale. Eleanor had suspected someone close to the family before she died. Nathaniel had always believed her illness was responsible for her death, but now he began questioning everything. The brass key led them to an abandoned storage building on the far side of the ranch. Inside they found an old wooden chest covered in dust. The key opened it. Inside were letters, property records, and a diary belonging to Eleanor. Clara read the first few pages while Nathaniel stood beside her. Eleanor had written about missing money, forged ranch documents, and someone secretly selling cattle under Nathaniel's name. Then came the final entry. She had discovered that Henry had been stealing from the ranch for years. Nathaniel could barely breathe. Henry had not simply wanted the ranch. He had been slowly destroying it from within. The accusation against Nathaniel was designed to make him look guilty if the truth ever surfaced. But there was one final problem: the evidence was incomplete. They needed proof that Henry had forged the documents. Before they could search further, Henry arrived at the ranch with 2 men and a county official. He claimed Nathaniel had murdered Eleanor and was attempting to manipulate Clara into helping him hide the truth. Clara stood beside Nathaniel, terrified but determined. Henry demanded that Nathaniel surrender the ranch temporarily while the matter was investigated. Nathaniel refused. Then Henry produced what appeared to be a confession signed by Nathaniel himself. Everyone in the room went silent. Nathaniel stared at the paper. "That's not my signature," Henry smiled. "The court will decide that." Clara suddenly remembered something from her father's box. Thomas had been a handwriting clerk for the county years earlier. He had taught Clara how to recognize forged signatures. She examined the document carefully, and noticed that the letters were copied too perfectly. The person who forged it had practiced Nathaniel's signature from an existing document. Clara pointed out 3 differences that a genuine signature would never contain. The county official examined the paper and became suspicious. Henry tried to leave, but the ranch workers blocked the door. Nathaniel did not threaten him. He simply said, "For once, Henry, let the truth speak for itself." The investigation uncovered everything. Henry had been stealing cattle, forging property documents, and secretly selling ranch assets. When Eleanor discovered the scheme, she planned to expose him. Henry had attempted to stop her, but Thomas Bennett had witnessed enough to protect Eleanor's evidence. Thomas hid the documents, and warned his daughter never to trust the wrong people. Eleanor's death had been caused by her illness after all, but Henry had used the tragedy to create suspicion and protect his criminal scheme. The accusation against Nathaniel had been one final attempt to take control of Silver Creek Ranch. Henry was arrested, and the truth about Eleanor was finally cleared. But Nathaniel was not celebrating. He stood alone beside Eleanor's grave that evening. Clara found him there. "She was afraid before she died," he whispered. "I spent 2 years believing I failed her." Clara replied gently, "You didn't fail her. You raised her sons, you kept her memory alive, and you gave them a chance to become happy again." Nathaniel looked toward Clara. He finally understood what Eleanor had meant in her letter. Clara was never supposed to replace Eleanor. She was supposed to help the family heal. Several days later, Nathaniel approached Clara again. This time, there was no document, no pressure, and no desperate reason behind his words. "I asked you to marry me because I thought my sons needed a mother," he said, "but I was wrong. They needed someone who cared enough to stay, and I discovered that I want you here too, not because you need shelter, but because this ranch became a home when you arrived." Clara smiled through tears. She accepted his proposal. Their wedding took place beneath an old oak tree overlooking Silver Creek. Samuel carried the rings, and Eli scattered wildflowers along the path. Clara wore a simple cream-colored dress, while Nathaniel wore his finest black suit. There was no extravagant celebration. Just family, friends, ranch workers, and 2 boys who finally believed they had found something they had been missing for years. Months later, Clara reopened the old schoolhouse in Willow Creek. Nathaniel funded the repairs, but he placed the building in Clara's name. "It's yours," he told her. "You were never meant to stop teaching." Clara turned the abandoned school into a place where children from poor families could learn without worrying about money. Samuel became an avid reader, while Eli grew into a fearless young horseman. And every evening, the 4 of them returned to Silver Creek Ranch together. Years later, people in Willow Creek still remembered the story of the poor teacher and the rich cowboy. But they remembered the wrong part. If they thought it was a story about money, it was really about 2 lonely people who believed they had lost everything, only to discover that family could begin in the most unexpected place. Clara had arrived with $3 and 1 suitcase. Nathaniel had possessed thousands of acres, but lived in a house filled with silence. By choosing each other, they discovered something neither wealth nor money could buy. So, if this story touched your heart, like this video and subscribe to Meaningful Impact 2.1 for more emotional frontier stories about family, courage, sacrifice, and second chances. And remember this, he's sometimes the person who arrives at your door asking for shelter, isn't someone you are meant to rescue. Sometimes, they are the person who helps you finally find your way home.